Now let's go ahead and take a look at 3.2, measuring to the unit, measurement conversions. So we're using all of these unit rates, all of these down here, these are all unit rates, 16 ounces to a pound, 2.2 pounds to a kilogram, 8 ounces to a cup, 7 days to 1 week. Okay, so they're all unit rates. You're going to be using these to help you answer some of these questions down here. So first of all, on each one of these problems, I want you to set up the proportion. So all of part A, that is 1 through 7, you're going to set up a proportion that looks like this. So if you know that 1 cup is equal to 8 ounces, and you want to know how many ounces or how many cups is in 50 ounces, then you would set up a proportion like this. Okay? Now you're going to set up a proportion, then you're going to cross multiply. So now when we cross multiply, you would look, well, first of all, let's strip this down. So let's forget about the units. So forget about cups and fluid ounces, and you would have 1 to 8. Forget about cups and fluid ounces, and you would have x over 50. Now when we cross multiply, you would take 1 times 50. So 50 times 1 is equal to the other cross product, 8 times x. And so figure out 50 times 1, that's 50. But 8 times what number will give you 50? Well, you just divide that by 8. What you do to one side, you do to the other side. And so then you would get x is equal to whatever 50 over 8 is, which would be 6 1/4. And that would be cups. Okay, so 50 ounces is equivalent to 6 1/4 cups. Now let's go ahead and do the first one together. Again, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to set up that proportion. So here we have our problem. So let's set up our rates, right? Which is our ratios. So first of all, 5 miles. All right, so here we go. We got it now. Okay, so Kate walks 5 miles in 2 hours. So 5 miles in 2 hours. 5 miles every 2 hours. And then how far can she walk in 1 hour and 15 minutes? So 1 hour and 15 minutes, well, that's in terms of time. So that goes on the bottom, right? So our 2 times are on the bottom, and we don't know how many miles. That's what we want to know. So the first thing on all of these, you set up a proportion. So in place of the question mark, we're going to put a variable. Let's put a question mark there for now. So now let's rewrite this, okay, but without the miles or hours. So you would have 5 over 2. And then over here, the question mark would be replaced with an x. That's your variable, your unknown. And here's the other tricky part. There's 2 ways you could go about this. You can change both of them to minutes or both of them to hours, right? So in this case, if we change this to hours, 15 minutes is a quarter of an hour. 1/4 is 0.25. So this is 1.25 hours. We need to have both of these in the denominator. They need to be both of the same unit. That's why you're using those unit conversion tables. So we would say this is equal to 1.25 hours. Okay? Or if you wanted to change them both to minutes, you could do 5 over 2 hours is 120 minutes is equal to x over 1 hour and 15 minutes is 75 total minutes. And when we work these out, you see that you get the same thing. So go ahead and work these out on your own and then come back to the video. All right, so let's go ahead and kind of walk through what's going on here. So the first thing is I cross multiply and you get 5 times 1.25 is equal to 2 times x. cross multiplying, and then you want to get the x by itself. So you would ask the opposite question. You would divide the other side by 2. That's where that came from, and divide both sides by 2. So your x is by itself. And you end up with 3.125, and make sure you label it. So this should be your final answer right there. And then over on the right side, you do the same thing. Here's your cross products right there. Then you would divide out that 120 there to both sides. And then 5 times 75, divide that by 120, and you get 3.125. So you got to make sure that you have all of that right there. So on each one of these problems, set up the proportion, strip it down, cross multiply, solve it to get your answer. So this is the only point at right here. That's really where you'll need your calculator. You won't need your calculator anywhere else. So go ahead and do numbers 2 through 7 on your own, and then come back to the video to check your answers. So if we take a look at the second one, number 2, here we have our proportion. 3/4 is to 15 minutes as x is to 80. So I changed that to all minutes because 1 hour and 20 minutes is also 80 minutes. That's where that came from. Okay, because we want these to be the same. Minutes to minutes, miles to miles. Now, if they're all the same, then we can go ahead, we can cross multiply. So cross multiply there, that's where that comes from, 3/4 times 80. And then cross multiply here, 15 times x. And then to get the x by itself, you divide each side by the 15, and that's where the 4 comes from. So your final answer would be x is equal to 4 miles on that one. On number 3, let's take a look at this one. So 1 cup of whole milk has 8 grams of fat. How many grams of fat are in a gallon? So let's look at this. So first of all, you notice 1 cup to 8 grams. And then I change, it says 1 gallon of whole milk. Well, looking at my conversion table, I know 1 gallon and 16 cups are equivalent. So how many cups to X number of grams? And then I want to go ahead and cross multiply. So 1 cup times 6 grams, that's where the 1, or X grams, that's where the 1 times X comes from. And then the other way, 8 times 16. And then our final answer, you're going to divide out that 1, which is just 16 times 8. That's where the 128 grams comes from. So our final answer would be 128 grams. Let's take a look at number 4. So if we set it up, we know that when he is cutting lawns, he knows that 2/3 tanks will cut 3 acres. So they want to know how much will 1 tank cut. And so we're going to go ahead and cross multiply there. That's where those come from. Divide out that 2/3. When you divide by a fraction, it'll actually be a larger number. So that's where the 4.5 acres comes from. So this would be our final answer. Make sure we're labeling those as well. And on number 5, setting this one up, you know that there are 276 calories and 6 ounces of chicken. So that's where that comes from. So they want to know how many calories in 1 pound, and there are 16 ounces in a pound. So now we had our proportion. We go ahead and we cross multiply right here and here. And then our final answer, when we cross multiply, you would take 276 times 16 and divide by 6. You should get 736 calories. Now let's take a look at number 6. So here we set up our problem. You would have 12 beads take up 5 inches. So they want to know how many beads, that's where the X times the B comes from, is on 1 foot of string. So again, those need to be either both feet or both inches, and it's easier to change them to inches in this case. And so we will go ahead and set up this proportion. Then we're going to go ahead and cross multiply. So when we cross multiply, you would have 12 times 12 is equal to 5 times X. And then 144 divided by 5, that will give you, it's like 28.8 or something like that. And since it's 28, I'll write that 0.8. But you can't put 0.8 of the beads, so it's just going to be 28 beads. And so that would be our final answer for that one, since you can't have 0.8 of a bead. So when you start to get good at this, if you look at the expression on the left, the proportion on the left there, when you start to get good at it, you don't necessarily have to write the... I still would at this level, but I'm just saying if you're kind of ahead of us, you notice I didn't write any of the units, because 12 beads, and you notice the tricky part here is says it takes up 5 inches, but that's not 5. Okay, the store only sells the string by the centimeter. So if I know how many inches or how many centimeters are in an inch, and there's 2.5 centimeters in an inch, if you go back and look at your chart, there's 2.5 centimeters in an inch, right? Then it's going to be 2.5 times 5, and that's where that 12.5 came from. Okay, and we want to know then, okay, I have 50 beads, what's the length of string that I'm going to need for 50 beads? And then when we solve from here, we go ahead and cross multiply, and then we're going to take 12.5 times 50 divided by 12, and you would end up 50 beads take 52 and 1/12 centimeters. So he's going to need 53 centimeters, because they sell it by the centimeter, of line of string. That's how much you're going to have to purchase for this particular project. That would be our final answer there. Okay, now Sean's walking 3/4 of a mile in 15 minutes. Okay, so that's the rate that we're looking at, 3/4 of a mile in 15 minutes. He wants to know how far he can walk in 1 hour and 20 minutes. We can set a proportion, which we will end up doing, but let's look at it a little bit differently. Let's look at some of these things that Sean is doing. It says he writes the expression 3/4 divided by 1/4. Okay, and completes the division. So what information does this give Sean? So think about it, see if you can't come up with an answer, pause it if you need to, and then come back to the video. So if you think about what he's doing, he's taking this number in terms of miles and this number in terms of hours, right? And he's dividing them. So if you want to know what the unit rate is, so if you know that it's $2.45, right, per 2 gallons, and you want to know, well, how much per gallon, you would take 245 divided by 2. So he's doing the same thing here. He's taking 3/4 divided by 15 minutes is 1/4 of an hour. So he's finding the unit rate. Right, and in this case, he found that it is, if you do divide those, you would end up with 3 miles per 1 hour. Because if you take 3/4 divided by 1/4, you get 3. And so 3/4 miles over 1/4 of an hour simplifies to 3 miles per hour. So he found the unit rate. Number 2, consider question A, part 6. That would be this one. And it says, explain how Shaitan can use Sean's method to find how many beads fit on a single foot of string. So again, you'll be doing the same thing. So if you know 12 beads make up 5 inches, you just divide those. So what is that? 2 2/5 beads per 1 inch of string. So you're just rewriting this as you're just dividing them, and it's still over 1. So you could do the exact same thing on that. So, but I guess it says a foot of string, doesn't it? Right, so if you want to know a foot of string, well, I know this is going to be 12 inches, so you would also multiply this by 12. And so this would be 28.8. That should look familiar. Over, now this is going to be 1 foot, right? And so it's 28.8 per 1 foot of string. And then on 3, Davina tells Sean to use a proportion to find how far he can walk in 1 hour and 20 minutes, she writes this. How is Davina's strategy similar to Sean's strategy? Well, first, she starts at, okay, how it's different is she starts at the unit rate, and then she rewrites it as this, whereas this is kind of where we started, right? So Sean started here and went back to the unit rate, where she starts at the unit rate and goes there. And then she sets that equal to a proportion. So really, the proportion piece that we're going to be solving, this is kind of confusing, is just this part. Okay, or you could also do, nope, you're going to keep it like this, because that's in terms of hours, because we want to know in, what was it, 1 hour and 20 minutes. Okay, so then this would be the proportion that you would solve. All right, so it's similar in that it uses the unit rate, but it's different because it starts at the unit rate. And then on 4, how is Sean's strategy similar to using a rate table? So if we do a rate table, first of all, go ahead and fill out this rate table, like what goes here and here. Pause the video and copy this rate table and fill this out, and then come back and see how you did. Okay, so Sean's strategy is similar to using a rate table. We've used rate tables in the past. Okay, so when using a rate table, it's a pretty simple method, right? So imagine these are your ratios. So right here is your first ratio. You have 3/4 over 1/4. Here's another ratio, 3:1. And then here's another one, 4:1/3. All of those ratios should be equivalent. So depending on how you found 3 and 4, there are several different methods you could go about. Like number 1, you knew this was times 4. And so in order to do that, we could set up 3/4 is equal to, we don't know what that was, over 1, but I knew that was times 4. So when I do this, I'm also going to do times 4. Whoops, let me set this up correctly. This is actually 3/4 over 1/4, so 3/4 over 1/4. Right, so that's times 4, so this also has to be times 4. 3/4 times 4 is 3. Okay, and then to find this one right here, you could do 3 over 1 is equal to what over, I'm going to change this to 4/3, right, because you took this times 4/3 to go from there to there, and then to go from there to there, you're also going to multiply by 4/3, and when you do that, 3 times 4/3, you get 4. All right, so it's the same thing. You're just scaling up, scaling down, similar to the stuff that we've already done hundreds of times before. It's just looking at it through a different lens or a different context. And that is all that I have for 3.2, measuring to the unit, looking at measurement conversions.